Hi, I'm Bill, and welcome to my 7th episode of Not Your Crazy Uncle, entitled American Immigration, a Nation of Hypocrites. Most of us know the story about how approximately 12 million immigrants came through Ellis Island from 1892 to 1954. We became known as a nation of immigrants, and we remain proud of our ancestral heritage. But now we, the product of immigration, want to deny the same opportunity to others. Let's back up for a second. When you come right down to it, there's only one of three ways that we came to be living in this country. 1, our ancestors were native to this land. 2, we are the descendants of slaves who were brought here by force. And 3, we're immigrants or the descendants of immigrants. Now, I never hear natives protesting modern immigration, but they make up only 2% of the American population, and they have very little political power. I rarely see Americans of African descent leading the anti-immigration charge either. Ironically and hypocritically, the anti-immigration movement in our country is led by the descendants of immigrants. So let's get this right out in the open, shall we? When we talk about opposing modern immigration, we're rarely talking about Europe, or Australia, or Asia, or Antarctica, and certainly not Canada, although I might not be opposed to the notion of deporting Justin Bieber. But we're really talking about Mexican immigrants. Our European ancestors escaped poverty and oppression. They came here seeking economic opportunity and a safer, more prosperous environment for themselves and their children. If you dare to compare Mexican immigration from the 21st century to European immigration of the 20th century, people get offended by this as though you've somehow insulted their heritage. They'll say, "How dare you? Their situation was different. My great-grandparents were hard-working, God-fearing souls striving to give their families a better life, not deadbeats and criminals. They came here legally. They did it right." Although 100 years have passed, the only difference that I see in today's immigration is their nationality. Immigrants once called America the greatest nation in the world, and then their children put up a do not enter sign. So what part of illegal don't you understand, critics will say. I have no problem with legal immigration, but it's the illegals who are ruining this country. The notion of coming here legally has many flaws, primarily the thought that the immigrants who arrived at Ellis Island needed some sort of pre-approval to land here. Did you know that the majority of immigrants who came through Ellis Island followed a process that would be considered illegal today? There was no waiting list. They simply showed up, and if they could show that they were in good physical and mental health and weren't criminals, they were processed through. Sometimes the process would take 5 to 8 hours. At most, some were detained, and on average, 2% were denied entry, with 98% being allowed through. The complete immigration process today isn't even worth discussing, because the first step basically destroys the possibility for legal immigration for most Mexicans. They must obtain a green card, which sounds simple enough, but according to the Cato Institute, it could take as long as 20 years to simply get an interview for the green card. And that's for the preferred applicants with family already living here legally. Even the absolute most conservative estimates put the wait at 8 years. Who has that kind of time to wait? The Cato Institute also reports that 14% of all green card applicants from 2018 will die of natural causes before becoming eligible to receive one. And that percentage is even higher for Mexicans. They're breaking the law because it's a fraudulent law. The legal process only gives the illusion of a valid immigration policy. You know how some legal and political documents are intentionally complicated so the average person can't understand them? Well, that's our immigration laws. They stack the deck against the potential immigrants, especially from Mexico, while giving the illusion that legal immigration is feasible. So now let's talk about the Mexican Americans who are already here, whether they're referred to as illegal, legal, or undocumented. Regardless of what you call them, they're here because they wanted to join what we call the greatest nation in the world. And there are so many myths about Mexican Americans that people perpetuate that are simply not true. The first two that I want to address are related. The first argument is that they're here to leech off the American government through welfare and other giveaways. The other argument is that they're stealing jobs that should rightfully belong to Americans. Talk about playing it both ways. Which is it? Are they here to leech or are they here to work? Either way, both sides of the argument are simply not true. Numerous studies have found that immigrants pay more in taxes than they receive in government benefits and services. And legal immigrants use federally public benefit programs at a lower rate than U.S.-born citizens. As far as stealing jobs, at the time of the posting of this video, America has a major employee shortage problem. How many businesses would love to have a willing, hard-working employee at this very moment, but they can't find one? Guess what? There are many who want to fill the void, but they're either prevented from entering this country or they're afraid from applying for the job because they might be deported. And as far as their impact on our economy, people seem to forget that Mexican Americans buy clothing, they buy cars, they buy breakfast cereals, they rent apartments, they buy houses. You get the idea. Throughout American history, we've observed economic booms in times of population growth. Yet allowing people in who want to become an active part of our society will somehow destroy our economy? It doesn't make sense. Another myth that people buy into is that immigrants are bringing crime with them into the United States. This is simply not so, aside from the fact that many consider them criminals for their very existence. If you want to look at isolated instances, then of course you'll find examples of individuals who committed a violent crime. But a legitimate screening process could have prevented many of those. If you want to look at the overall statistics, they show that Mexican American immigrants have a much lower percentage of violent crime than the remainder of the population. Additionally, many Mexican immigrants are the victims of crimes, but refrain from reporting them for fear of deportation. There are so many more myths about Mexican immigration that I could discuss here, but then this would turn into an hour-long video with an overload of statistics and information. I've pinned some links into the comment section to some legitimate sources about the issue. It's where I've gathered much of the information for this video. It stands to reason that there are leaders of the anti-immigration movement who exemplify the greatest ideals of hypocrisy. For these individuals, I've created the Immigration Hypocrite Hall of Fame. Here are my first ballot entries. First, we have Mitch McConnell, a career politician and Republican leader in the Senate with a long history of anti-immigration views. His wife of 28 years immigrated from Taiwan when she was 8. Now, her father was a wealthy businessman, not some poor farmer, so I guess that makes it okay. Of course, we also have to include Donald Trump, our most outspoken anti-immigration president, who brought a first lady immigrant into the White House. Melania did it the right way, though, of course. She came on a work visa, as a model. We have to make exceptions for the beautiful people, don't we? Now, don't get me wrong. I have no problem with the way Melania got here. The hypocrisy is what's so disgusting. And the Immigration Hypocrisy Hall of Fame wouldn't be complete without Barack Obama. His father was a Kenyan citizen who was never an American citizen. And many people question the validity of President Obama's American citizenship. So you think he'd at least understand. And yet he also took a hard line against immigrants. Democrats, like Obama and President Biden, like to call Republicans racist for their immigration policies. But when they're in power, they do nothing to correct the situation. They just throw up their hands and say it's all the Republicans' fault. Now, Hall of Fames are considered the best of all time. But with any Hall of Fame, you have the legends. With sports, it's Babe Ruth, Jim Brown, Wilt Chamberlain. Well, in this Hall of Fame, our greatest immigration hypocrite of all time is Rafael Cruz. Rafael's father was born in Cuba and eventually became a Canadian citizen. Rafael was born in Calgary in 1970. Eventually, the family moved to Houston, Texas. And this is when Rafael Edward Cruz began realizing that deep down inside, he was meant to live his life as an American and not the Canadian that God intended him to be. He began wearing cowboy boots and dressing in Texan garb. He studied American history, and at the age of 13, began going by the name of Ted. And in 2014, he renounced his Canadian citizenship entirely. And the transition of Ted Cruz from Canadian to American was complete. This natural-born Canuck was now a cowpoke. So Ted Cruz, one of the most outspoken Republican leaders opposing immigration, is an immigrant himself. Remember when Republicans were tripping over themselves trying to prove that Barack Obama wasn't born in America? Well, guess what? There's no mystery with Ted Cruz. He wasn't. This 2016 presidential candidate, Ted Cruz, was not born in America. And yet he has the audacity to tell people not to enter our country. But that seems to be okay with Republicans. He came from north of the border, not south after all. To add to the hypocrisy, Ted Cruz opposes the Mexicans entering our country to avoid a poverty-stricken life. But during a natural disaster that crippled his home state, he turned his back on his constituency and ran off to Mexico. Now, not all people who oppose immigration are hypocrites. Are you open to the possibility of closing our borders to all countries? Not just Mexico? And then every single person who does not belong? Well, then you might not be a hypocrite. if you also happen to be a Native American. As for me, I am an American citizen of European immigrants. I support immigration, and I am not your crazy uncle.